Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 17, or Chapter 16. Izuku woke to find Yagi sitting next to the bed, eyes closed patiently but not asleep. His backpack was set by the leg of the chair, tucked against Yagi's satchel. He must have grabbed it from the classroom. "Yagi-san?" Izuku whispered, not wanting to startle him if he could help it. He straightened in his seat immediately and looked over Izuku.
"Good morning, Izuku."
He smiled as Izuku sat up more. Izuku hummed in response and pulled the blanket back, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. His muscles ached horribly, but he didn't let it show. He refused to.
"I brought you a new uniform. I didn't want to go through your bag at all, but I wanted to be sure you had a clean pair of clothes."
Yagi reached into his own bag and pulled out a pressed uniform. He accepted the uniform with a small smile. He appreciated that Yagi didn't go into his bag. It was essentially his whole home, just portable, after all. "Thank you!" Izuku looked at the uniform and cast a careful search over Yagi with his quirk. It was a relief to find just the bare minimum of his chronic pains present. "I'm glad you are doing better." That got a surprised but quiet laugh out of Yagi.
"I should be the one telling you that, my boy. Are you hungry?"
"Not really. At least not right now. Thank you for bringing my stuff."
"You haven't eaten in a few days now."
Yagi watched him as Izuku grabbed his bag and hurried to the bathroom, closing and locking the door immediately. Izuku slid down the door and held his bag, nerves riled. It was like this every time he left his bag somewhere for whatever reason, but this was the longest he had gone without his bag in a long while. He carefully unloaded it. His school stuff? A small notebook that was a precarious splurge from ages ago, with countless notes about his observations of the city's patterns, safe routes, his quirk, his ability, and other quirks he had witnessed. The words squished almost onto each other to get every yen of worth out of it. 2 changes of clothes, the chopsticks Yagi got him wrapped up carefully in their center, his uniform, a baggie with his meager amount of cash, a battered old metal water bottle. These things generally were on the newer side of quality because of Yagi's habit of gifting. They were a concern, of course, but not his main one. He opened the small front pocket and nearly wept in relief. He carefully pulled out the large plastic baggie that kept his oldest and most cherished belongings safe from the elements. The charm, a small All Might toy, parts of the polyester now hardened into char in patches. A tiny Polaroid of Beryl, the dog he walked most often, given by the owners before they moved. Then, most importantly, 2 photos of his mom. One still in one piece but a bit wrinkled, and the other charred on the edges and discolored slightly from heat damage. He held the photos to his chest and his breathing hitched. It was all there still. There was no reason for anything to be missing, but the anxieties were long driven into his core. He counted beats softly under his breath, the way Yagi had shown him, and tried not to cry. "She's still here." A shuddered breath, and he carefully replaced his belongings. He needed to get ready for the day. The actual usage of a full bathroom instead of the school or public restroom or bath to freshen up was strange. He made quick time out of habit more than anything else. When he finally stepped out of the bathroom, fully dressed in the clean uniform Yagi had brought, he found his mentor waiting patiently with a small bento in his lap.
"Ah, I know you said you weren't hungry, but I had brought this with me for you to carry for the day."
Yagi stood up and held out the bento almost nervously.
"It's not a lot, but I know sometimes a hospital visit really ruins one's appetite."
Izuku accepted the bento, not wanting to turn down Yagi's continual kindness. He knew he could, and there wouldn't be any repercussions. It was still distantly new to know he could do as much, but that made him want to accept all the more. He opened it to find 3 small onigiri nestled together, each individually wrapped and inviting to the eye.
"Recovery girl cleared you to leave this morning if you feel within the bounds of your abilities. This is new territory for all of us except you, so it would be greatly appreciated if you remained honest about your health and well-being."
Yagi picked up his own bag and pulled it over his shoulder. Izuku took a breath and felt the weirdly distant and suppressed internal pain again. "I think I'm okay to go. I don't think I will be doing anything as severe as what just happened again soon." He nodded in understanding.
We would still need to run the exams she wanted to do when you are back to your normal. You will have to come back after the school day is over.
School started back up? Izuku was genuinely surprised it started again so soon. The villain attack was beyond the breadth of a simple security breach.
It's more for public image than anything else, I imagine. All field trips and out-of-building exercises have been cancelled. It's just routine school days until further notice.
Yagi explained. How long until the school day starts? Routine. He could do routine. That was a constant he relied on to keep calm all the time. Outside, you could see the sun had risen based on the light, but the sun itself was hidden, so he couldn't really hazard a guess.
Roughly 2 hours, my boy. It's just past 6. Plenty of time for the meeting we have to go to.
Yagi patted his shoulder, giving him an apologetic smile when he jumped slightly at the contact. His nerves shot through the roof immediately. Meeting?
The principal wishes to speak with you. That and the police still need a statement, so they have an officer waiting with him.
They walked out of the room, and Izuku hesitated before relenting to his urges and gently grabbing the edge of the strap of Nyagi's bag. It felt so stupidly childish, but his heart was hammering in his chest, and the indirect contact was desperately desired.
I'm going to be with you the whole time, Izuku. I won't be leaving you alone where you are safely comfortable.
Okay. He was quiet, lagging slightly behind, but still holding on to the bag. He almost pulled out an onigiri, but that would mean letting go of the bag in the comforting silence of the medical wing. Izuku figured after the stunt he pulled that he would be questioned. The principal probably just wanted to know all the details about his monster form. It would be fine. Yagi was with him, so it would be fine. His nerves had only just began to fade when they reached the connector hall of the main building and medical wing. He froze. Yagi stopped a beat later. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows revealed multiple police vehicles outside the main gate's lights on. There were uniforms placed strategically around the campus yard and walkways. Yagi moved to stand next to him, watching them mill about even with no students on campus yet.
They aren't here because of you. They don't know about your existence and the context of the USJ attack. It's for the comfort of the students at large.
They waited a few more moments before Yagi lightly placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him back on their way. Today was going to be an emotional roller coaster, and Izuku felt that it wouldn't be restricted to today only. They reached a hall that had no massive windows, which is saying a lot in UA, and Yagi flared up into all might in a single stride and stopped in front of a door.
Would you like to knock?
All Might looked down at Izuku, grinned small, but there. Can you do it? Izuku was doing his best not to visibly shiver. He really didn't want to do this. He wanted to run. He didn't want to be kept by anyone as some freak investment of study. He didn't want to be treated like the thing he was.
Of course, my boy.
All Might knocked heartily on the door, and it slid open immediately. Nezu sat in a chair at the end of a coffee table with 5 cups of tea carefully set out. Izuku looked over the principal carefully from behind All Might. He had previously recognized Nezu just from Yagi's brief explanations of him, but the fact that he was legitimately the principal of UA only now clicked into place. A man with a simple, unassuming appearance sat on the couch to Nezu's right, hat sitting on the arm. All Might stepped into the room and gestured for Izuku to follow. It's okay. It's safe. Izuku looked up at the person who opened the door for them. Cat eyes met his own and dilated wildly for a brief moment before returning to normal. Confusion was evident as Izuku hurried past him and sat on the couch opposite of the presumed officer waiting next to Nezu. Welcome. Please take a moment to enjoy some tea as we get familiar. Nezu smiled as he picked up his tea. All Might settled onto the couch next to Izuku and carefully picked up the cup in front of him.
Hello, Sukoichi-kun.
All Might beamed at the man as the officer who opened the door closed it and sat next to his coworker. He chuckled and picked up his tea as well. Good morning, All Might, and good morning to you too, Midoriya-kun. This, he gestured to the cat-headed man who still was studying him with mild confusion. is my partner Sansa. He is here to record your statement as I ask what we were hoping to learn from you. Okay, sir. Izuku pulled his bag off and brought it around to sit in his lap, arms curling around the comforting weight. The questions started immediately. What he had been expecting going into the trip, if things had seemed off on the journey to USJ. When did he notice things were off? What he remembered about the attack directly, with the addendum of how any details can help in his retelling. All Might chipped in sometimes to reassure Izuku that he didn't have to force himself to relive the memories if they were too painful or scary at the moment. Something that Tsukuyoshi redoubled on, ensuring that they appreciated any help, but the police were not there to force him to relive something so traumatic so soon. He carefully doesn't mention the monster. When his retelling got to the moment he healed Aizawa's elbow, he slowed to a stop. All eyes were on him as he trailed off.
Are you okay, young Midoriya?
All Might sat up a little straighter, concerned. I blacked out when the villain ran at me and Tsuyu, Izuku said nervously. He felt ashamed that he was lying like this, but he was afraid. He couldn't tell them that, though. Tsukuyoji's gaze snapped up from his folder he was holding. Something flashed in his gaze that had Izuku nearly physically recoiling. I'm sorry to hear that. The detective looked back down to his folder. So you don't remember anything after jumping off of that boat? Izuku swallowed his nerves as subtly as he could and nodded. I screwed up. I don't know how, but I did. It was a distinct feeling of screwing something up. There's a difference somehow between a mess-up and a screw-up. One Izuku had learned through his life experiences. He isn't called on it, though. Instead, Tsukuyoshi read out the general statement Izuku had given to make sure they had it right. He gave the folder in his hand to Sansa and instructed him to take the folder and the report Sansa had recorded to their respective destinations and meet with the rest of the officers. The more hands that were going over the school security systems and property, the better, after all. Breaches and blips could be missed by old eyes compared to fresh ones. A few moments passed in silence after Sansa left the room. All Might released his quirk with a sigh. Izuku looked at him with wide eyes and let out a sharp breath of relief as his anxieties lessened. This was a safe place.
Izuku, this is my good friend in the Force, Tsukauchi Naomasa. He's a person I trust more sincerely, and one I believe is safe for you to talk to. He has a lie-detecting quirk, which helps his work as a detective.
Yagi smiled as he set his empty teacup down. Izuku's had gone cold, untouched. I'm sorry. Izuku reflexively apologized for the lie. You could feel the ever-present gaze of the silent Nezu throughout this whole exchange. Don't worry about it, kid. Lots of people lie when they're afraid. Tsukuyoshi waved off the apology with a smile. Would you like to continue? Izuku looked at Yagi, who just kept his smile. Okay. I'll have to explain a bit more, though. Just let me explain after I tell you what I remember. He got a confused but accepting nod and cleared his throat. Nezu sat up more. He mentioned how he had tried to get Yagi's attention from the moment he felt the Nomu, it was called a Nomu, with his quirk. He talked about how he tried to figure out as many details as possible the moment he hit the water, but he was just choking on Yagi's injury and the panic. He got to the boat and hesitated. Izuku continued his story. He explained that he shifted, but it was wrong. He didn't know why it happened wrong, just that it had. Talked about how he did his best and apologized repeatedly, only to be told it wasn't his fault. It felt like it was, though. He glanced over and saw how interested Nezu was in his shift particularly, dark eyes glinting with something he didn't know how to place. When he mentioned that the Nomu was somehow just as much of a monster as him, except it felt like it had been forced to be one, Nezu flicked an ear, head tilting slightly. He started to trail off again as he finished. He was running out of things to mention, which is probably a sign that he's starting to ramble more than give actual information. Is this monster, as you call it, a new development? Nezu spoke finally, after all this time. No, not entirely. The way I ended up at USJ was different from how I normally am. I have been able to shift for as long as I can clearly remember. Izuku picked out his backpack. It sounded stupid to make the distinction of clearly, but it was important to him. He had fuzzy memories, memories that felt more like dreams than anything else. Dreams of his mom, a home constant where people had been excited to see him. All this mixed with odd impressions of blurry people he didn't know if he was supposed to know or not.
Do you have full control of it?
Tsukuuchi had sat back in his seat, hands folded on his lap.
I'm not an it!
Izuku didn't mean for it to come out as a snap. Surprise was written on Tsukuuchi's face, quickly replaced with an apologetic aversion of attention. He tried to soften his words.
My monster form is just me. I meant the change itself, not yourself. You made it sound like you didn't expect our plan on the way you had appeared at all.
He clarified. Izuku wilted under his words, the guilt immediate.
Sorry.
They sat patiently as Izuku settled himself.
Yes and no. The shift has changed and grown with me. It shouldn't change as suddenly and drastically as it had at USJ. I can change when I want, for the most part, and can switch easily between me now and me as a monster. I am the same monster right now, just tucked away.
He disregarded the solemn gaze he felt resting on him from Yagi.
I have to change sometimes. It's like letting my body breathe. It's always at night that it happens, and it is near regularly, but not an exact schedule.
He sighed.
That's all I know.
Izuku stared at his bag. His nerves said he shouldn't be talking so openly. Anxieties that are ages old ringing through his muscles, memories. His brain said that of all people to trust, that the few who knew about Yagi would be the best to start with.
Thank you for your contributions to the investigation, Midoriya-kun. The names of the villains is a fantastic tidbit to have in hand with their appearances. Your secrets otherwise will remain within the confines of this room.
Tsukuuchi bowed and left the room quickly, hat fixed back to sit on his head again. The door hardly closed before Nezu set his cup down and climbed onto the armrest of his chair, his gaze bright and ears pricked with clear excitement. Nezu patted his paws rapidly on his lap for a beat, short whiskers pressed forward with flared interest. He could see how his student was confused, slightly off-put, suppressing anxiety, and trying to appear unfazed all at once.
Fascinating, he sniffed carefully. Absolutely fascinating, truly interesting to the highest degree.
Midoriya was getting jittery. Midoriya was a result of miracles long past. His other form crisply hidden within himself in such a way that Nezu could just barely even smell the mossy fresh water that had been hidden under the scent of blood and atmosphere.
I had figured that you must have a different sense of presence to have been hidden for so long from the general public. I had not expected that you would have the extent of change to even smell different than your other form.
He clasped his paws together, taking in all the information he could and turning it over.
I'm sorry?
Midoriya sounded unsure about how to take the words. Even Yagi appeared absolutely lost.
Oh, there is no need to be. Simply stating my observation. What I find much more important is this. You truly have no idea what you are, do you?
Nezu tilted his head as his very soul thrilled with the opportunity to teach and learn at the same moment. Midoriya seemed to be a bright yet troubled young mind, one with a very bright future ahead of him if he grasped the right chances and windows that would soon be open to him. Humans are fascinating creatures, but Midoriya was a much more interesting beast of delight for Nezu's prying quirk. The two shook their heads, something that he found both amusing and telling. They had attempted research, be it together or in their own times.
I used to spend hours reading online and in libraries about what I might be.
Midoriya fidgeted as he spoke, picking absently at the overlap of the uniform's two sleeves.
Trying to find things that were similar and stuff like that, to figure out what I am and what I could do about it. The closest I ever got to just the logistics of what I am, not even close to my appearance though, was the Western idea of lycanthropy. I haven't researched in years, though. I couldn't afford to with how constricted my schedule is.
He pulled his back closer to his chest. A nervous tick in response to underlying shame at a presumed failure. It was nothing of the sort, though, in reality. Nezu was beyond pleased that as a child Midoriya had expressed the desire and drive to dive into studies both in and out of school. a drive that is evidently still there with a choice of wording. This was all very good. Nezu couldn't help the excited giggle that escaped him. This was fantastic!
Well, it would seem I may have some information that would be of interest to you then. You see, I have met your kind before, and at a time long in my history, I may have a name to offer you.
Midoriya's eyes widened. Nezu grinned as the boy pushed his bag onto Yagi's lap and turned to face him, one leg folding to be entirely on the couch.
There's more monsters? There are people like me?
His tone was agonized, bordering on slight hysteria, as he evidently struggled to stay seated. The boy clearly wanted to get up or grab something for a sense of grounding, yet he remained seated, trying to stay within acceptable social conventions. He truly thought he was the sole member of a dying breed, and clearly believes himself to be solely describable as a monster. Nezu nodded, but didn't get to continue right away. He didn't have the chance to, as Midoriya, bolstered by a simple nod, continued with his questions.
Did they look like me too? Were they bigger because they were older?
That is where you will have to understand the broadness of your existence.
His interruption and the boy snapping to attention.
They were not identical. In fact, they looked nothing like you.
Nezu felt for Midoriya. He truly did. There was an intrinsic sense of isolation in learning that you would likely never find a member of your own kind and likeness. There is a comfort in solidarity.
They didn't look similar to each other either. They held the same presence as you, though. There is a sense of instinctual sanctitude that comes with your other form. You are the result of a blessing, Midoriya Izuku. Maybe not upon you directly, but to someone long past in your family line.
Nezu watched the intensity of Midoriya's gaze increase with every word.
Good. He's listening. Have you heard of the word obake? It has a fairly common usage, but it has been warped with its meaning over the years.
Nezu saw Yagi sit up straighter behind Midoriya.
I thought obake were ghosts.
Midoriya sounded mildly lost.
Obake means a thing that changes, my boy. Essentially, it just means shapeshifter in terms of more modern wording.
Yagi said as he held onto the bag gently and twisted to face Nezu more directly.
I'm sure anyone could have generally described this as shapeshifting, but the typical concept of shapeshifters involve previously existing creatures or objects.
He continued, searching for clarification.
They're a subclass of yokai. A common one in popular culture would be tree spirits. Although you are even more specific than that, Midoriya.
Nezu flipped a paw vaguely to the side.
The two of your kind I have seen before were called tutelaries.
There was silence in response, a moment where the information sank in.
A guardian? Like one that teaches? Like the kami?
Midoriya was pulling at his bottom lip in thought. His legs had now both made their way onto the couch and were pulled up to tuck under his chin. Yagi coughed harshly.
So he's like a god?
Shock was radiating off of him.
No, but he was blessed by one. His family was, at least.
Nezu studied the boy's gaze. There was a spark there. He may not remember, but the concept was ringing home somewhere internally.
The idea that the men who informed me, let's say, about the tutelaries believed their forms were generalized by family line, but also influenced by the quirks. I assume they had experience with more than the two I have seen.
He glanced to the clock above the door. It was nearly time for the school day to start. He could hear the students that wandered the halls for a while now.
But my mom never changed like I did.
Midoriya sighed softly. The confliction of his memories, however small they were, with the information he was learning clearly frustrated him.
It may be part of how your quirk influenced your form,
he offered, for there was no way to truly know without the elder Midoriya actually present.
I very much so hate to cut this revelatory discussion short, gentlemen, but I do believe classes start in 15 minutes and it wouldn't do to be late on your first day back, Midoriya. I'm sure your classmates are quite worried about you.
The boy sat up quickly and twisted to face the clock. He choked back noise of surprise as he saw it was indeed 15 minutes until classes started and scrambled to get off the couch. He quickly bowed as he threw words of thanks and farewell in the direction of the two adults in the room. Nezu simply smiled and waved as Midoriya gently took his bag from Yagi with a look that held an unexpected weight to it.
Hurry along, my boy.
Yagi smiled and watched him slip out of the room. Interesting. Oh, so very interesting. I have a name. Izuku slid past the doorway a bit as he skidded to all sides, burning internally as he sucked in a deep breath. I'm not alone. He opened the door. After fixing his coat sleeves, multiple heads turned to face him, a majority of which lit up with relief or excitement. He smiled sheepishly as a million questions started to bombard him. A glance across the class showed Suyu pointedly avoiding looking at him, her posture tense. He swallowed nervously before he got hit by the weight of Uraraka, tackling him with a hug, followed by a sharp scolding from Ida. He didn't even really register the words he was hearing from anyone. Slowly, unsure of how much he was allowed to do, he wrapped his arms around Uraraka to return the hug. He saw Shinzo roll his eyes with a lopsided smile just as Kirishima bounced into his view. I'm not alone either way.